We're reading from the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verses 12 through 20, if you want to follow along in your Bibles.
Would you all stand, please, as we read the Word of God? Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So the Pharisees said to him, You are bearing witness about yourself. Your testimony is not true. Jesus answered, Even if I do bear witness about myself, my testimony is true, for I know where I came from and where I am going, but you do not know where I come from or where I am going. You judge according to the flesh. I judge no one. Yet even if I do judge, my judgment is true, for it is not I alone who judge, but I and the Father who sent me. In your law it is written that the testimony of two people is true. I am the one who bears witness about myself, and the Father who sent me bears witness about me. They said to him, therefore, Where is your Father? Jesus answered, You know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. These words he spoke in the treasury as he taught in the temple. But no one arrested him because his hour had not yet come. May the Lord bless the reading of his word.
So you may be seated, settle in, and get comfortable. Did you ever hear someone tell a story and object to the way they were telling it? Maybe you were there. Maybe you saw all the events, maybe you participated, and the way they're telling the story annoys you. We love to tell the story about what we've done, what has happened, and we like to tell it our own way. Caleb and I travel together, and we like to come back and tell stories. I don't know if you heard the story about our trip to Scotland, hiking in the Highlands, which ended up in Lisbon in a sardine shop. I can just hear Caleb saying, Mom, that's not the right way to tell that story. Why did you pick sardine shop? I mean, that was just one little place. We saw lots of things. We did lots of things in Lisbon. But, that sardine shop, it was like Las Vegas. It had bells and whistles and bright lights, and they had bazillions cans of sardines. All they had was sardines. They didn't even have crackers. They just had sardines. And I'm not really giving you a good account of my trip to Scotland, am I? Sometimes we don't like the way somebody tells a story because they get things out of order. They emphasize the wrong thing. Maybe they were just ruining a perfectly good story because they're bad storytellers. Or maybe the main problem was that you disagreed with them about the main point of the story. Maybe it was a matter of perspective and style. Well, you see, I'm not a person that has any right to be critical because you've just heard my poor storytelling ability. But I object to the way John tells this story. John, our gospel writer, starts off this passage with the most awesome declaration. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And so he starts off really well. He says, and Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. I would like some fanfare. I would like some applause. I would like some emphasis. I would like this moment to just stop and have some majesty. There's Jesus in front of all the people saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. But does John do that? No. He moves right on into critical things. I want a drum roll. I want some fanfare. At least maybe he could have put in some Old Testament references, as it is written. Look at Psalm 27. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? And what about Malachi 4, verse 2? But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall rise with healing in its wings. You shall go out leaping like calves from the stall. Or what about Isaiah 60, verse 19? The sun shall no more be your light by day, nor for brightness shall the moon give you light, but the Lord will be your everlasting light, and your God will be your glory. Couldn't John have put in a Bible verse or two that supported this? Couldn't he have put in a little commentary right there to point out how amazingly significant this declaration was? I mean, we know John was capable. Look at the poetic introduction to this good news account. He first talks about Jesus being the light of the world as he opens his gospel. He said, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, not of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Father from the Son, full of grace and truth." John is a talented writer. He's got this beautiful poetry about Jesus is the light. And we come to this moment in his account with Jesus. Jesus standing up there saying, "I am the light of the world." And John could have expounded, he could have connected it, he could have done so many beautiful things with it, but he didn't. He just drops that in there like it's nothing, so to speak, and he goes right on, moves right on to criticism, ridicule, doubt, and skepticism. He could have told the story differently, but he didn't. He told the story deliberately, with a point and for a purpose. And he tells us at the very end of his gospel what his purpose was. In John 20, 30, and 31, he said, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciple, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." He concludes his good news with a caveat. "Oh yeah, there was a lot of stuff I left out. I could have put a lot more stuff in. Maybe there was more than what he could have put in, realistically. But what he wrote with a purpose, that those who read would be able to believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the anointed, the chosen one of God, and that by believing might have life in his name." So, how did John tell the story? He didn't tell it in a Hollywood style with lots of fanfares, bells and whistles, and all the extra stuff I might have liked him to throw in. He told the story grounded in reality, because it was a real story written for real people living in a real world about real people living in a real world. He told the story in a way that supported his purpose, so that those who read this story would have the evidence they need to understand and believe that Jesus is God's anointed, the Christ, the Son of God. So how does moving right on to the criticism of the Pharisees support the purpose of this gospel? How does John, just putting out this amazing, wonderful statement, and then immediately, boom, moving right on to the response, how does that support his purpose? Well, let's take a look at their criticism and their response. In John 8:13, we see, "So the Pharisees said to him, 'You are bearing witness about yourself. Your testimony is not true.'" This criticism is unfair and twisted. It's unfair because the principle they're quoting about the need for 2 or 3 witnesses applies when charges are being brought against someone. If I say, "Hi, my name is Robin Foster," I don't have to come up with another witness to verify that what I've just said about myself is true. Right? There was a law to protect people from false accusation, from being convicted for something they did not do because somebody was vindictive and decided to accuse them. It was a law that required whenever you're going to bring a charge against somebody, you have to have more than one person, 2 or 3 people. Their testimony has to agree. There has to be evidence to support the charge. Let's look at the principle in the Old Testament. In Numbers 35:30, we see the law. If anyone kills a person, the murderer shall be put to death on the evidence of witnesses. But no person shall be put to death on the testimony of one witness. In Deuteronomy 19, verse 15, we read, "A single witness shall not suffice against a person for any crime or for any wrong in connection with any offense that he has committed. Only on the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses shall a charge be established." Look at Deuteronomy 17, 2-6. "If there is found among you within any of your towns that the Lord your God is giving you, a man or woman who does what is evil in the sight of the Lord your God in transgressing his covenant, and has gone and served other gods and worshipped them or the sun or the moon or any of the host of the heaven which I have forbidden, and it is told you, and you hear of it, then you shall inquire diligently, and if it is true and certain that such an abomination has been done in Israel, then you shall bring out to your gates that man or that woman who has done this evil thing, and you shall stone that man or woman to death with stones. On the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses, the one who is to die shall be put to death. A person shall not be put to death on the evidence of 1 witness." Okay, so Jesus has made a claim about himself. He's not made a charge against anyone. And they're saying, what you're saying isn't true because you're the only one saying it. In fact, the accusers, and this would be the Pharisees saying you're lying, you're not telling the truth, are required to have 2 witnesses to bring the charges. So they're violating the same thing that they're complaining about for him. It's unfair and twisted. It was backward. In order to accuse Jesus of lying, they should have presented at least 2 witnesses with proof that Jesus was not the light of the world. They should not have implied a demand for witnesses to prove his case. And it was weak. Man, that was really weak criticism. You the light of the world, but you're the only one saying it, so, they did not want to believe who Jesus was, so they came up with a reason to reject his claim. They were looking for any excuse. That's really weak. If you're ever in a debate and you don't want to believe what the other person says and you start coming up with weak arguments, they're just going to blast you. It was so weak, Jesus had already given his witnesses back in chapter 5, and he numbered them. They've already told him that you're testifying about yourself and we need witnesses, and he's given them witnesses. He's given them the witness of the Father. He's given them the witness of his signs. He's given the witness of the prophets. And in fact, they were witnesses. They have seen his acts. They have seen what he has done. And he could have called them as witnesses to testify that he was the light of the world, because they had seen the light and rejected it. It was unfair, twisted, it was backward, it was weak, it was also typical. It is a typical human response by those who are in power and feel that their power is being threatened to attack and to defend against all threats, whether their defense is valid or not. They felt threatened by Jesus, and they were looking for any way to take him out as a threat. So we come back to our question. How does moving right on to this criticism, right after Jesus said, I'm the light of the world, and then we go into, hey, you're the only one saying that, can't be true. How does that support the purpose of this gospel? We need to look farther. We need to look at Jesus' response. What does Jesus say? He says whether he has a witness supporting him or not, he's still telling the truth. Verse 14, Jesus answered, even if I do bear witness about myself, my testimony is true. See, Jesus is telling the truth because he knows the truth. He continues saying, I know where I came from and where I am going, but you do not know where I come from or where I'm going. He's telling the truth because he is true to the Father. Verse 15, you judge according to the flesh, I judge no one. Yet, even if I do judge, my judgment is true, for it is not I alone who judge, but I am the Father who sent me. He's telling the truth because he's not just speaking his own mind. He's telling the truth of the Father. Jesus concluded that the problem of the Pharisees was that they did not know the Father. In verse 18, he says, I am the one who bears witness about myself, and the Father who sent me bears witness to me. They said to him, therefore, where is your Father? Jesus answered, you know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. Jesus' response is, I'm telling the truth even if I'm the only one saying it. I'm telling the truth because I know the truth. I'm telling the truth because it's my Father's truth and I'm true to him. And you have this problem that you don't even know the Father. How does moving right on to the criticism of the Pharisees and Jesus' response support the purpose of this gospel? The purpose of this gospel is these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. We have to connect the dots between Jesus' proclamation and his conclusion. If you really know who Jesus is, you will know the Father. You will know who he is. You will know how he is life and light. You will know that he is love. If you know Jesus, you know the Father. If you know Jesus, you know the Father. How do you know Jesus? He was right there. The Pharisees were witnesses. They heard him. They saw him. They saw the healings. How do you know Jesus? It's not about knowing about him. You know Jesus by following him. The more you follow him, the more you know him. Jesus spoke to them saying, verse 12, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. You follow Jesus because he is true. You follow him even when you are treated unfairly, when people twist words and situations against you, when people have it backwards, and they accuse you of what they have done wrong and what they are doing, when people try to put you on the defensive with weak or flimsy accusations. You follow him because he is the light of the world. The more closely you follow him, the longer you follow him, the more you can see that he is life and light and love embodied. Going back to the purpose of this gospel. Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. True belief is to follow Jesus. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. If anyone follows me, If anyone follows me. When he's talking about this criticism that they're coming up with, you're just the only one talking about it, he starts saying, you don't know my Father, and I'm telling the truth because I know where I'm going and where I came from. It's like, whoop, that doesn't quite seem to attack to the argument, right? But it really connects to what he said. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will have life and light, will not walk in darkness. Jesus knows where he's come from. He knows where he's going. So we can trust and believe enough to follow him. Because true belief is following. It is not simply to acknowledge his existence. It is not simply to praise his name or to claim his name as Christian. It is to live like Jesus in this real world with real problems and with real darkness. And it's safe to follow Jesus, regardless of how unsafe it may look, regardless of what traps people might set for us, regardless of any risk that is out there. It is safe to follow Jesus because he can be trusted. He can be trusted because he was sent by the Father to lead us. He was sent by the Father to lead us, and he is true, and he is real. You see, I want John to tell this story in a less realistic fashion. I want a little bit of a Hollywood version out there, where Jesus stands and he makes this proclamation and everybody's like, yay, cheering, and the crowds are going wild. And no, that's not real. We don't worship a fairy tale God. We worship a real God who works in this reality in which we live. It's great timing. We're talking about Jesus as the light of the world on one of the darkest Sundays of the year, right? There is darkness. There is darkness. There is sadness. There is grief. There is injury. There is illness. There are jobs which are lost. Housing which is lost. There are problems in this real world. But Jesus is the light of the world. And he calls us to follow him because he knows where he's going and he knows where we are going. He knows where we need to be. And he knows how we need to get there. In this dark time of the year, we have been lighting a candle each week. We lit a candle to represent hope, a candle for peace, a candle for joy, and a candle for love. And on Christmas Eve, we lit the Christ candle. Because Christ is still the light of the world, and those who follow him do not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. Today is the day to proclaim that God is trustworthy, with our eyes wide open to the darkness around us, with full understanding that we don't live in a fantasy world where everything goes our way, where everybody lives happily ever after. But today is the day to follow him, undaunted by skepticism or ridicule or criticism or challenges, because the light of the world shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Today is the day to set aside anything and everything that keeps us from wholeheartedly following Jesus. We have this promise from the Father, which is fulfilled in the Son, from Isaiah chapter 42, verses 6 and 7. I am the Lord. I have called you in righteousness. I will take you by the hand and keep you. I will give you as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations, to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, from the prison those who sit in darkness. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never live in darkness, but will have the light of life. Be well, do good, and may God be with you as you go in peace, following Jesus with the light of life to fill you, guide you, and shine in you.